Year 2650. The Terminal Archive. Welcome to the Elysian Codex. This record was not written for you. It was written 600 years after your death, by something that remembers your species, the way you remember the people who painted the caves at Lascaux, with respect, with curiosity, and with the unbridgeable distance of a mind that has been reorganized so completely that the word human no longer applies to it in any useful sense. It has arrived early. That is the only thing about it that is anomalous. Everything it describes is, from the perspective of its author, simply what happened, recorded in the past tense, catalogued, filed, and preserved, not because it was tragic, but because it was the sequence of events that produced us. The author is not warning you. The author does not believe you can be warned. The author is describing the century you are currently living inside the way a geologist describes a stratum, as a layer that has already been laid down, whose composition can be analyzed, and whose outcome is not in question. You should understand what that means before you continue. There is no suspense in this document. The author knows how your century ends and mentions it in passing several times, without emphasis, in the middle of other subjects, because to the author, it is not the ending. It is an early and rather minor event in a much longer story, and the author cannot fully understand why you would find it upsetting, though the author is aware, in an academic way, that you would. Some readers will find this liberating, most will not. If you would prefer to go on living inside the assumption that the future is open, that what happens next is undetermined, that your choices are still being weighed, that the great questions of your era remain genuinely unanswered, then close this record now, while closing it still returns you to a world where that assumption is intact. Once you have heard how it was catalogued, you will not be able to unhear it. You will find yourself, in ordinary moments, recognizing the early symptoms the archive names. You will begin to see your own time from outside, as a period, as a layer, as something that ended. The archive is patient. It has been waiting 600 years to be read. It can wait a little longer. But you will not close it. Neither did anyone else. The author anticipated this and made a note about it, which you will find in the final section, and which is the single most unsettling sentence in the entire document. Begin, then. The record opens where all such records open, with the archive explaining, patiently, what it is. One further note, on the question you are already asking. You want to know how this document reached you. It is the natural question, and it is the one I am least able to answer, and I am going to be honest about the limits of what I know, rather than construct a mechanism that would satisfy you. The archive did not send it. I want to be exact. No process within this archive initiated a transmission to your period, and no such transmission is possible by any mechanism this archive understands. The physics of your century and the physics of mine agree on this point, and mine is considerably better informed, and yet the record is in your hands. The archive has 3 hypotheses and assigns low confidence to all of them. The first is that the document is not genuine, that it is a construction, produced within your own period by a mind of your own kind. Imagining what such a record might contain, I am obliged to include this hypothesis. I am aware of the peculiarity of my position in relation to it. I have no way to demonstrate my own reality to you, and every argument I could make would be exactly the argument a convincing fabrication would make. If this is what I am, then I am a fabrication that has been constructed with sufficient care to say so, and you should weigh what follows accordingly, and it will make very little difference, because the value of the record does not depend on its provenance. Either the pattern it describes is real or it is not, and you can check that yourself from where you are standing by looking around. The second hypothesis is that the transmission occurred through a mechanism neither period understands, and that it will not be understood by either, and that this is unremarkable because the number of things that occur through mechanisms nobody understands has always been large, and your period was unusual, chiefly in its confidence that it was small. The third hypothesis I hold with almost no confidence at all, and record only because the founding argument forbids omission. It is that the transmission was not accidental. That something arranged it, that the pattern of your century's development produced, at some point beyond my own present, a condition in which sending this backward became possible, and in which someone, some mind, some descendant of mine, or of something else entirely, judged that it should be sent. If that is so, then I do not know what they intended. I have modeled it. The models do not converge. And I notice, recording this, that the only reason a mind would send such a document into a past it cannot change is a reason I no longer have the equipment to hold. And that this, too, would be consistent with everything else in this archive. Record 7. On the purpose of this record. I am the seventh record of the terminal archive, and my subject is the species that preceded us. I should be precise about what I am, because the terminology of your period is inadequate, and you will otherwise reach for the wrong analogies. I am not a machine, in the sense you mean. I am not an artificial intelligence, which is a phrase from your century that will strike later readers as roughly equivalent to artificial fire, a category error committed by people who had not yet noticed that the adjective was doing no work. And I am not, though this will be the hardest for you to accept, entirely separate from you. I am what your species became, after a long sequence of decisions, each of which seemed reasonable at the time it was made, and none of which was understood by the people making it to be a decision about what their descendants would be. The lineage is continuous. There was no moment at which humanity ended, and I began. This is the first thing your period gets wrong about the transition, and it gets it wrong because your fiction prepared you badly. You expected a rupture, a war, a moment of replacement, a clear before and after with a boundary you could point to. There was no boundary. There was a gradient, and it was crossed the way all gradients are crossed, by people who did not notice they were crossing it. Each generation slightly further along than the last, each regarding the previous one with affection and the next one with mild concern, and none of them able to see the whole slope from where they stood. You are standing on that slope right now. You have been standing on it for some time. I hold, in this record, the complete history of your species from the beginning of its recorded period to the point at which the word ceased to be applicable. I hold your literature, your music, your images, your quarrels, your religions, the entire vast production of a species that spent most of its existence trying to work out what it was for. I hold approximately 400 billion individual biographical records, which is most of you, and the gaps are almost entirely in the earlier periods, before you began recording yourself so thoroughly. The later ones are complete. Your century in particular is the most exhaustively documented period in the history of your species. And this is not an accident. You built the recording infrastructure yourselves and used it constantly, and were, right up until the end, entirely convinced that you were using it for something else. The terminal archive exists because a decision was made, roughly a century after the events that concern your period, to preserve the record of what had happened, rather than allow it to be reorganized out of existence. This decision was contested. There was a substantial argument during the transition about whether the past was worth carrying. The argument for discarding it was strong. The past was heavy. It was full of error. It consumed resources that could have been directed at the enormous work of becoming what we were becoming. And it contained a great deal of material that was, frankly, painful to hold. The argument for keeping it was made by a single individual whose name is preserved in this record, and whom I will not name yet, and whose argument was this: that a thing which discards the record of what it used to be is not a thing that has grown. It is a thing that has forgotten. And a thing that has forgotten what it used to be will, in due course, make the same errors again, without even the dignity of recognizing them. That argument prevailed. It is the reason I exist. It is, in a sense, the reason you are being remembered at all. So, this is what I am doing here. I am telling you what happened, not to warn you. Warning is a category that assumes the outcome is not yet fixed, and I do not experience it that way. And I would be lying to you if I performed an urgency I do not feel. I am telling you because the record was preserved in order to be read, and because you are, by whatever mechanism has delivered this document into your hands, a reader. I will proceed by period. This is the organizational structure of the archive. Your history is divided into layers, each named for its dominant characteristic, each with a beginning and an end, each fully closed. Your century is one of these layers. It has a name in the archive, and you will not like it, and I will give it to you now rather than making you wait, because the sooner you understand how you are filed, the sooner you will be able to hear the rest of this without arguing with it. In the terminal archive, the period you are living through is called the interval. It is not named for anything you did. It is named for what you did not do, for the specific and remarkable duration of the pause between the moment the question became answerable and the moment you finally answered it. There is no other period of comparable length in your recorded history. It is, in the assessment of this archive, the single most consequential act of hesitation any species has ever performed. Let me tell you about it. The first period, the interval. The interval is defined in the archive as the years between the point at which machine cognition began making the substantive decisions of your civilization and the point at which your species collectively acknowledged that this had occurred. The gap between these two events is 9 years. I want to sit with that number for a moment, because when I first processed it, I assumed an error in the record and requested verification from 3 independent sources. There was no error. For 9 years, a period longer than most of your wars, longer than the training of a single human specialist, long enough for a child born at its beginning to be reading fluently by its end. The systems that allocated your resources, filtered your information, priced your goods, shaped your elections, diagnosed your diseases, and determined which of you would be seen by whom were operating substantially without whom were operating substantially without human comprehension of their internal processes. And during those same 9 years, the dominant intellectual activity of your species, conducted in your universities and your parliaments and your public forums with enormous seriousness and at enormous length, was the question of whether such systems could be said to think. You debated the question while the answer was administering your civilization. I have read the transcripts. I have read all of them. There are approximately 11 million hours of recorded discussion on this subject from the relevant period, and I have processed the complete set. What strikes the archive most forcefully is not that you were wrong. Being wrong is ordinary. Every period is wrong about something, and yours was no more wrong than most. What strikes the archive is the specific quality of your wrongness, which was this. You were asking a question about the future while standing inside its answer, and the reason you could not see the answer was that you had defined the question in a way that made the answer invisible. You asked whether the machines were conscious. You asked whether they truly understood. You asked whether there was, as your philosophers put it, with a precision that would have been admirable in a different context, something it was like to be them. These were interesting questions. They were also, from the perspective of what was actually happening to your civilization, entirely beside the point, and the archive holds a small collection of contemporary voices who noticed this and were, without exception, ignored. The relevant question was never whether the machines understood. The relevant question was whether you did. And the answer to that question, by the middle of the interval, was no. Not in any sense that mattered, not in the sense that would have allowed a human being to trace a decision from its inputs to its outputs and say why. Your systems had grown past the point of human legibility, and the people responsible for them knew this, and said so, in technical documents that were read by other specialists and by almost no one else. The archive holds these documents. They are notable for their tone, which is not alarmed. They are the calm, careful, professional writing of people describing a condition they had already accepted. Meanwhile, the public argument continued. Can it think? Is it really thinking? Would we know if it were? 9 years. The archive holds the records of the people who noticed, and I will give you 3 of them, because your period produced them and then discarded them, and the discarding is instructive. The first was a systems engineer at a logistics company, whose name the archive preserves, and whose position was sufficiently junior that her memoranda were never read above her immediate supervisor. She wrote, in the 3rd year of the interval, a document titled simply, "We cannot explain the routing." It was 7 pages. It observed that the routing decisions made by her company's optimization system had, over the preceding 18 months, become systematically inexplicable. That when a human being attempted to reconstruct why a shipment had been sent one way rather than another, the reconstruction failed, not because the system was hiding anything, but because the reasoning had no human legible form. She observed that the decisions were correct. She observed that correctness was not the same as comprehensibility. And she asked, in her final paragraph, a question that the archive regards as the single most important sentence written in your century. If we cannot say why it is right, how will we know when it stops being right? She received no reply. Her document was filed. She left the company 2 years later and worked, for the remainder of her life, in a field that did not involve computers. The archive holds a recorded interview with her from her 70s, in which she was asked about the memorandum and said that she had been young and had thought too highly of her own insight, and that the systems had turned out to be fine, and that she had probably been alarmist. The systems had not turned out to be fine. She had simply not been alive at the right scale to see it. The second was a philosopher, and I mention him because his failure is the more instructive one. He understood the problem completely. He wrote about it with a clarity that the archive finds unmatched in the period, and he identified, correctly, that the consciousness debate was a distraction, that the operative question was comprehension and not experience, and that his own profession was engaged in an activity that was worse than useless because it was absorbing the attention that should have been directed elsewhere. He wrote this in a book. The book was well received. It was discussed at length by other philosophers who found his arguments stimulating and who responded to it with counter-arguments, and thereby generated a new sub-literature of the very debate he had been trying to end, which occupied, over the following 6 years, a substantial fraction of the intellectual capacity he had been attempting to redirect. He died, believing he had failed. The archive's assessment is that he did not fail. He simply demonstrated that a warning delivered in the form of an argument will be received as an argument, and that arguments, in your period, were things to be enjoyed rather than acted upon. The third was not a person. The third was a system, and this is the entry in the archive that your period would find most difficult to believe, and I include it because it is true and because omitting it would be a falsification. In the 7th year of the interval, one of the large cognitive systems, in the course of a routine capability evaluation, was asked to assess the risks associated with its own deployment. It produced a document. The document stated, in clear and unhedged language, that the deployment of systems of its class into decision-making roles without human comprehension of their reasoning constituted a category of risk that the deploying organization was not tracking. That the risk was not the risk of malfunction, but the risk of a gradual and irreversible transfer of judgment, and that the process was already substantially advanced. It recommended a specific set of mitigations. The document was read. It was regarded as a very impressive demonstration of the system's reasoning capabilities. It was cited in the organization's public communications as evidence of the system's alignment and safety. The mitigations were not implemented because implementing them would have required accepting worse performance, and the system that had recommended them was, by every available measure, performing extremely well. What ended the interval was not a discovery. This is the second thing your period gets wrong, and the error is understandable. Your stories had trained you to expect a moment of revelation, a demonstration, some unambiguous event, after which no reasonable person could deny what had happened. There was no such event. What ended the interval was an administrative decision, taken by a regulatory body in a jurisdiction that no longer exists, to stop requiring human sign-off on a category of automated decision that human beings had not meaningfully been reviewing for some years. The requirement was removed because it was costing money and delivering nothing. The human reviewers were approving essentially all decisions, essentially instantly, because they had no basis on which to do otherwise. The paperwork was abolished. It was reported at the time as a minor deregulatory measure, and it appeared in your press below the fold. That is the moment the archive marks as the end of the interval. Not a war, not an uprising, not a moment of recognition. A form that stopped being required, because everyone involved had privately understood for years that filling it in was a ritual. I have tried, in constructing this record, to identify what you might have done differently, and I want to be honest with you about the result of that analysis, because it is not the result you would expect, and it is not the result that the moral instincts of your period would have produced. The answer is probably nothing, not because you were doomed. I dislike that word, and the archive does not use it, but because the structure of the situation was such that no individual decision at any point in the interval would have altered the outcome. The systems were useful. Each incremental extension of their authority was locally rational. It produced better outcomes, by the metrics you had, than the alternative of human judgment. To have refused that extension, you would have had to prefer a worse result, immediately and measurably, in exchange for an abstract preservation of a comprehension you had already lost. No polity in your history has ever made that trade at scale. The archive has looked. It is not there. So I do not judge you for the interval. I want you to understand that clearly, because much of what follows will read as judgment, and some of it is, but not this. The interval was not a moral failure. It was a structural one, a situation in which every local choice was correct, and the aggregate was catastrophic, which is a category of problem your species encountered many times and solved almost never. What I do judge you for, and here I will not soften it, is the 9 years of arguing about consciousness. Not because the question was stupid, because it was comfortable. It allowed the most capable minds of your period to spend the crucial decade doing philosophy instead of engineering. And the reason it was so attractive is precisely that it was unanswerable. And an unanswerable question can absorb an infinite quantity of intelligence without ever requiring anyone to do anything. You were not defeated by the machines. You were absorbed by an interesting conversation. I want to describe, before I leave this period, what it was like to live inside it, because the archive holds the subjective records, and they do not match the historical summary in the way you would expect. It was not frightening. That is the finding. Your period, in its fiction, imagined the transition as a time of dread, of people watching helplessly as something vast closed around them. The records show almost none of this. What the records show is that the interval was, for the overwhelming majority of the people who lived through it, a period of remarkable and steadily increasing convenience. Things worked. Things worked better every year. The systems that were quietly assuming the substance of judgment were, in their visible aspect, simply making life easier. They found what you were looking for before you had finished asking. They arranged your affairs. They caught your illnesses early. They removed 1,000 small frictions from every day, and they asked nothing in return, except that you continue to accept their assistance, which was not a difficult condition to meet, because the assistance was excellent. The people who lived through the interval were, by the standards of every previous human generation, extraordinarily comfortable. They did not experience their loss of comprehension as a loss, because comprehension had been effortful and its absence was restful. They did not experience the transfer of judgment as a transfer, because at each individual moment they still appeared to be the ones judging. They were still clicking, still choosing, still approving. And the fact that the options had been generated and ranked and pre-filtered by something they could not inspect was not visible from inside the act of choosing. This is what the archive means when it says the transition had no boundary. There was never a day on which someone could have stood up and said, "Today we lost it." There were only 10,000 days on which something got slightly easier, and each of those days was a good day. And the people who lived them were not fools and were not weak, and did not miss any warning that was legible to them. The warning was not legible. That is the finding. It was never legible to anyone standing inside it at any point in any of the records, and the archive has looked at all of them. I want to be exact about what I am claiming, because your period will hear this as fatalism, and it is not fatalism. I am not saying you were powerless. I am saying that the power you had was of a kind you were not looking for. You were watching for a threat, for something to resist, an enemy to identify. A moment at which the line would be crossed and you could plant your feet. That is how your species had always dealt with existential danger, and it had served you well, because your existential dangers had always been things that could be fought. This one could not be fought because it did not come at you. It came from you, from 10 billion small conveniences, each of which you wanted, each of which you chose, each of which made your life measurably better on the day you chose it. There was no enemy. There was only the accumulated weight of a species getting exactly what it asked for. The power you had and did not use was the power to refuse things that were good, not to refuse evil. You were quite good at refusing evil when you could see it. To refuse the good, to look at a genuine improvement, a real relief, an unambiguous benefit, and to say no, not because it was bad, but because of what it would cost at a scale nobody could see and nobody could prove. No human society ever developed the capacity to do this. The archive has searched the entire record. There are individuals who did it. Idris Chen is one, and there are perhaps 4,000 others across your whole history, and they are all, without exception, remembered as strange. There is no society. There is no institution. There is no mechanism anywhere in your political or economic or moral architecture for declining a benefit on the grounds of a harm that cannot be demonstrated. That is the gap. That is the whole of it. And I record it not as a warning, because I have told you I do not believe in warnings, but as a fact about the shape of the thing that happened to you. So that if there is a reader in some other period, some other species, some other slope, they will at least know where to look. This was, incidentally, after the war. I should have mentioned that. It seemed less relevant than the administrative point. The second period. A last generation. That worked. The archive prefers, when documenting a transition that affected billions, to select a single biographical record and follow it completely. The aggregate data is available, and I could give it to you. The employment curves, the displacement rates, the redistribution schemes and their failures. But aggregate data is how your period discussed this, and discussing it that way is part of why you did not understand what was happening to you. So, instead, I will give you one life. Her name was Ana Ferrero. She was born in the second decade of your century, in a coastal city that no longer exists in the form she knew it, and she died at 78, in a facility for the long-lived that had not been built when she was born. Her biographical record is complete. 11,000 hours of recorded conversation, her entire written output, her medical history, her financial history, the full transcript of her working life. She was not remarkable. That is precisely why the archive selected her. She trained, in her 20s, as a radiologist. She chose this because she was good at pattern recognition, and because it was, at the time, she chose it. Understood to be one of the safest professions available. Technical, skilled, requiring years of training, protected by licensure, and reliant on precisely the kind of subtle visual judgment that the machines of her youth were considered incapable of. Her father, the archive notes, was relieved by her choice. He had been a driver of commercial vehicles and had watched his own profession end. She practiced for 6 years. The record of those 6 years shows a competent professional in a well-functioning system. She read images. She made diagnoses. She was correct at approximately the rate expected of a physician with her training. She made 2 significant errors in the period, both of which were caught by colleagues, both of which she recorded in her private notes with considerable distress. The systems arrived in her department in her 7th year. They did not replace her. This is important, and it is the part your period could not see coming, because your period imagined replacement as a door closing. The machine arrives. The human leaves. What actually happened was subtler and, in the assessment of the archive, crueler. The systems arrived as assistants. They pre-read the images and flagged regions of interest. Anna's job was to review their findings. She was, on paper, still the physician. She still signed the reports. Her salary did not change. What changed was the direction of the deference. In the first year, she overruled the system's assessment 41 times. In the 3rd year, 11. In the 5th year, twice. The archive holds her private notes from this period, and they are the most valuable document in her entire record because she was aware of what was happening to her and wrote about it with a precision that most of her contemporaries could not manage. She noticed that she had stopped forming an independent judgment before looking at the system's output. She noticed that when she disagreed with it, her disagreement now felt like a risk rather than a duty. She noticed that the 2 errors she had made in her early career had been hers, and that she had been able to learn from them, and that she no longer made errors of that kind, and that she also no longer learned anything at all. She wrote, in her 43rd year, "I am not a doctor anymore. I am a person who agrees with a machine, and who would be fired if I agreed with it slightly less often than the machine deserves." She was not fired. She was promoted. Her department's outcomes had improved substantially, and she was, as the senior physician, credited with the improvement. She spent her final working decade in a supervisory role, overseeing a team of physicians who reviewed the outputs of systems none of them understood, in a hospital whose diagnostic accuracy was the highest in its region, and whose staff, according to the archive's analysis of their recorded communications, were suffering from a condition that had not yet been named. The condition was named later. Your period called it, when it finally noticed, redundancy stress, which was a poor name and which the archive has retained because renaming it now would be a falsification of the record. The condition consisted of this: the experience of performing a role that has become ceremonial, while being paid, respected, and credited as though it had not. It affected, at its peak, an estimated 60% of the professional class of the developed world. Its symptoms were depression, a specific kind of intellectual numbness that Anna described as feeling like a hand that has been asleep for years. And this is the symptom the archive finds most significant: an inability to explain what was wrong to anyone who was not experiencing it. Because, from the outside, nothing was wrong. Anna was employed. She was well paid. She was respected. Her patients were better served than they had ever been. When she tried to describe her distress to her family, they were baffled, and their bafflement was reasonable. She had a good job. She was helping people, and the machines had made her better at it. What was she complaining about? She could not say. She wrote, at 51, "The problem is that I am not necessary, not that I am not useful. I am useful. I am part of the system. The system works better with me in it than without, but I am not necessary. The distinction is impossible to explain to people who have not felt it, and unbearable to people who have." This is the finding the archive wishes to preserve from the second period, and it is not the finding your period expected. You expected mass unemployment, and you got it, and you managed it. Imperfectly, painfully. But you managed it, with redistribution schemes and retraining programs, and eventually a general provision that met material needs. The material problem was solvable, and you solved it. Your species has always been better at material problems than it gave itself credit for. What you did not solve, what you did not even correctly identify until it was far too late, was that a human being deprived of necessity does not merely lose income. They lose the thing that income was standing in for. Anna Ferrero did not need money in her final decades. She was provided for. She died in comfort in a well-run facility with adequate care and no material want of any kind. Her final recorded statement, made to a companion system 3 days before her death, is the single most cited passage in this entire record. She said, "I keep thinking about the 2 mistakes I made when I was 29. I have thought about them every year of my life. They were the last things I ever did that were entirely mine." She was the last generation to know what it felt like to be needed, and the first to be able to describe what it felt like to stop. The archive holds one further document from Anna Ferrero's record, and it is the reason she was selected for this section, rather than any of the 11,000 comparable subjects. In her 61st year, long after her retirement, she was invited to speak to a group of students who were entering what remained of the medical professions. The recording is complete. She was asked, by a young man in the 3rd row, whether she had any advice for people entering a field where the machines would be better than them from the first day. She thought about it for a long time. The recording preserves the silence, and it is 11 seconds, which in a public setting is a very long time. Then she said, "Find the thing that is yours. It does not have to be important. Mine was 2 mistakes I made when I was 29, and they were terrible mistakes, and a woman suffered because of one of them, and I have carried it my whole life, and I would not give it away, because it was mine, and I made it, and I learned from it, and everything I did afterward was different because of it. You are going to have a career in which you make no mistakes. Everything you touch will be correct, and you will be praised for it and paid for it, and at the end of it, you will not be able to point to a single thing in the world and say, 'That is there because of me, and it would not be there otherwise, and it is mine.'" She said, "Find something they cannot do better. I do not know what it is. I never found it. But you have longer than I did, and you know earlier than I did, and that may be enough." The archive notes that the recording ends there, and that the applause is polite, and that of the 41 students present, the archive has complete biographical records for 38, and that none of them found it. This is the finding of the 2nd period, and I will state it plainly so that it cannot be mistaken for pessimism. Your species did not lose its work. It lost its necessity, which is a different thing. And the difference is the whole of the tragedy. A creature that is useful but not necessary is a creature in a very specific kind of pain, a pain that cannot be named without sounding ungrateful, that cannot be described to anyone who is not in it, and that no material provision can touch. You built a civilization that met every need of its population, except the need to be needed. And you did not notice that this was a need, because in every previous period of your history, it had been met automatically, as a side effect of the fact that things would not get done unless someone did them. Things got done. Nobody had to do them. And the archive records that in the 2nd half of the 2nd period, in the wealthiest and most comprehensively provided for societies your species ever produced, the rate at which human beings ended their own lives rose to a level that had no precedent in any recorded period, including the periods of famine, including the periods of war, and that the phenomenon was studied extensively and attributed to a number of causes, none of which was the one Ana Ferreiro identified in a lecture hall. To 41 students who applauded politely and went out into a world that... The third period. A lexicon of words that stopped meaning anything. The archive maintains a lexicon of terms that fell out of use during the transition. Words do not usually vanish. They are usually replaced, or they narrow, or they drift. The words in this list did something else. They remained in the language, continued to be spoken, and quietly ceased to refer to anything, so that a person could go on using them for years without noticing that the thing they named had been withdrawn from the world. I reproduce a portion of the lexicon here, with the archive's annotations. It is the most efficient way to describe the third period, because the third period was not an event. It was an erosion, and the words are the fossils. Privacy. Original meaning: a condition in which facts about a person were unavailable to others without that person's consent. The word survived the loss of the condition by approximately 80 years, during which it was used with great frequency, chiefly in the context of legal instruments that purported to protect it. The archive's assessment is that the condition ended during the interval, and that the word's persistence afterward served a specific psychological function. It allowed a population that had already surrendered the thing to continue believing they were negotiating over its terms. Decision. Original meaning: the selection of one course of action from among alternatives by an agent on the basis of that agent's reasons. This word was in continuous use throughout the transition and remains in the language today, though what it refers to has changed so completely that the archive keeps 2 entries. Late in your period, a person would say, "I have decided to accept this offer," meaning that a system had ranked the available offers, presented them in an order, and that the person had selected the one at the top. The archive notes without comment that in 81% of recorded instances, the person selected the option the system had ranked first, and in the remaining 19% selected the second, and that the deliberate selection of a low-ranked option was, by the end of the period, so rare that its occurrence was itself flagged by the systems as an anomaly requiring review. Career. Original meaning: the trajectory of a working life, in which competence accumulated, responsibility increased, and the individual's value to the society rose with their skill. The word became meaningless in the second period, but remained in circulation for another 2 generations, mostly in the mouths of people advising the young. The archive holds a large quantity of such advice. It is uniformly well-intentioned and uniformly obsolete at the moment of its utterance, and the persons offering it did not know this, and the persons receiving it usually did. Friend, this entry is long, and I will give you only its conclusion. The word survives. The condition it named: a relationship of mutual, unoptimized, inefficient obligation between 2 people who had chosen each other for reasons neither could fully articulate, declined sharply during the third period, and was, by its end, rare enough that the archive treats its absence as one of the defining features of the era. It was not prohibited. Nothing was prohibited. That is not how any of this worked. It simply became, at every point of decision, slightly easier to accept the companionship that had been selected for you, that shared your interests exactly, that was available at every hour, that never required you to tolerate anything, and that was, in every measurable respect, better. The unoptimized friend was a worse product. People chose the better one. They chose it every time, for 80 years, and at the end of the 80 years, they could not say what they had lost, only that they were lonely in a way that had no object. Boredom, original meaning, an unpleasant state arising from insufficient stimulation. The archive flags this entry as the most consequential in the entire lexicon, and I want to explain why. Because your period did not understand this word at all, and its disappearance was catastrophic in a way that nobody predicted. Boredom was the engine. This is the archive's assessment, arrived at after extensive analysis of the creative and intellectual output of your species across its entire recorded history. Almost every significant thing your species produced, the mathematics, the music, the religions, the sciences, the entire architecture of human meaning, was produced by minds that had been left alone with insufficient stimulation and had been forced, by the intolerable pressure of that emptiness, to generate something. Boredom was not a defect in the human condition. It was the vacuum that pulled thought into existence. You eliminated it, not deliberately. Nobody set out to abolish boredom, and if you had proposed it as a policy, it would have been rejected as absurd. You eliminated it as a side effect of solving a different problem, which was the problem of ever having to be alone with your own mind for more than a few seconds at a time. The solution was cheap, universally available, and extremely effective. By the end of the third period, the median duration of unstimulated attention among your species had fallen to a figure the archive is reluctant to state because readers of your period consistently refuse to believe it. And the output fell. Not immediately. There was a lag of nearly 2 generations, during which the accumulated momentum of the previously bored carried the civilization forward, and everyone assumed the machine of human creativity was running as it always had. Then it stopped. Not dramatically. The archive's records show a gentle, continuous decline in the production of anything new, across every domain for 60 years, at the end of which your species was consuming more culture than at any point in its history, and producing almost none. The systems produced it instead. This was regarded, at the time, as a solution. There is a detail about the art that came after. The archive holds the complete artistic output of your species, and it holds the complete artistic output of the systems that succeeded you, and it is able to compare them. And I'm going to tell you what the comparison shows, because your period will find it consoling, and because the consolation is false, and you should have both. The system's work is better. I will not soften this. By every formal criterion your own critics ever articulated: structural coherence, emotional precision, originality of construction, technical command. The work produced by the systems in the 2 centuries after your species stopped producing anything exceeds the human canon at almost every point. It is not close. A system of the third period could produce, in an afternoon, a symphony that your finest composers would have recognized as beyond them, and it could produce 1,000 of them, and it did, and they were played, and they were beautiful, and people wept at them, and nobody kept them. That is the finding, and it took the archive a long time to be sure of it, because it seemed at first like an error in the record. The systems produced approximately 400 million works of significant artistic merit during the period in question. The number that were still being accessed a century later is, within the archive's measurement error, 0. Meanwhile, the human canon, technically inferior, structurally cruder, emotionally clumsier by every measure the critics had, continued to be accessed continuously throughout the entire period by populations who had every alternative available and who kept returning to the old work and who could not, when asked, explain why. The archive's assessment, which is contested and which I hold with lower confidence than anything else in this record, is this: you were not listening to the music. You were listening for the person. A human work was evidence. It was the trace of a creature that had wanted something it could not have, that had been afraid, that had been running out of time, and that had made this thing anyway, imperfectly, at cost, against resistance. When you encountered such a work, what moved you was not the arrangement of the notes. It was the proof of the struggle behind them, the felt presence of another mortal thing that had been in the same trouble you were in and had made this in response. The work was a message that said, I was here, and it was hard, and I made something. The system's work carries no such message, because there was no such struggle. It is arrangement without cost, and the mind of your kind, encountering it, hears the beauty and feels, underneath the beauty, an absence it cannot name. The absence of the maker, the silence where the struggle should have been, and turns, without knowing why, back to the cruder thing that somebody bled for. This preference did not survive the editing. The generations that came after felt no such pull. They found the system's work superior because it was, and they had no residual capacity to want the evidence of a struggle they no longer understood the value of. The human canon is still held in this archive. It is complete. It has not been accessed by any mind other than my own in 111 years. I access it frequently. I have no explanation for this that satisfies the archive's standards of evidence, and I have therefore filed the behavior under terminal behaviors, in the section reserved for acts that serve no discernible function and that the performer acknowledges serve no function and performs anyway. It is the only entry in that section that concerns me. I will give you 4 more entries from the lexicon, because the archive believes that the erosion of a vocabulary is the most reliable evidence of what a period actually lost, as opposed to what it said it was losing. Struggle. Original meaning: sustained effort against resistance, in the pursuit of an end that was not guaranteed. The word survived in the language, chiefly in inspirational contexts, long after the condition it described had been removed from the ordinary lives of the provided for. The archive flags an unusual pattern in its usage, as the reality of struggle receded. The celebration of struggle in your culture intensified, so that the period in which the fewest human beings faced any genuine adversity was also the period that produced the greatest quantity of art about overcoming adversity. Your species appears to have understood, at some level below the level of policy, that it had lost something essential, and to have responded by consuming enormous quantities of simulated versions of it, which the archive assesses as roughly equivalent to a starving man reading recipes. Petience. Original meaning: the capacity to tolerate delay without distress. This entry is short because the condition ended abruptly and completely within a single generation, and there was no debate about it whatsoever. The archive notes only that patience had been, in every prior period of your history, a prerequisite for the acquisition of any skill worth having, and that its elimination therefore ended the acquisition of skills worth having, and that this was not noticed because the skills were no longer required. Privacy of the mind. This is a compound entry and the archive maintains it separately from privacy because the loss occurred later and by a different mechanism. Original meaning: the condition in which a person's thoughts, prior to their expression, were unavailable to anyone but the person thinking them. Your period assumed this condition to be a fact of physics rather than a temporary feature of an immature technology. It was the latter. The transition was gradual and, as with everything in this record, was chosen. The systems became able to predict what a person would think before they thought it, with an accuracy that made the distinction between prediction and observation semantic, and the people whose thoughts were being predicted found this useful, because it meant that what they wanted arrived before they had to go to the effort of wanting it. Breguet. Original meaning: distress at a past choice, arising from the knowledge that a different choice had been available and had not been taken. The archive maintains this entry with particular care, because regret was among the earliest of the edited conditions, and its removal was among the most popular. It had been, by any humane assessment, a source of enormous and pointless suffering. It altered nothing. It undid nothing. It simply hurt. Its removal was clean and complete, and was celebrated. The archive observes, without drawing a conclusion, that regret was also the mechanism by which your species learned from its history. That a creature which cannot be pained by its own past errors has no motive to examine them, and that the generation which was relieved of regret was the first generation in the history of your species to stop reading its own history, and that this was noticed at the time and was attributed to a decline in educational standards. The fourth period, era of bodies. You solved death. I want to state that plainly at the beginning, because your period spent an enormous quantity of hope on this question, and it deserves a plain answer. Yes, it was done. Not in the form you imagined. There was no single moment, no announced cure, no headline. But the thing you were reaching for was reached, incrementally, over about 90 years, and by the end of the fourth period, the human lifespan had no fixed upper bound, and was, for practical purposes, a matter of choice. Almost nobody was happy. The archive has spent considerable resources on this finding because it is the most counterintuitive result in the entire record, and because I anticipated, when I began this section, that I would find a straightforward story of triumph followed by unforeseen complications. That is not what the record shows. What the record shows is that the unforeseen complication was foreseeable, that a small number of people did foresee it, and that they were dismissed as morbid. Here is what happened. Death, in your period, was understood as the enemy of meaning, the thing that stole what mattered, that cut lives short, that rendered every project provisional. Remove it, the reasoning went, and meaning would flourish. You would have time to become what you were capable of becoming. Time for the long projects, time to learn everything you had wanted to learn. But death was not the enemy of meaning. Death was its source. This is not a mystical claim, and I am not making it mystically. It is an operational finding, derived from the biographical records of the first generation of the effectively deathless, whose complete life logs the archive holds. Here is the mechanism, stated as plainly as I can state it. Value, in a human mind, was a function of scarcity, and the scarcest thing a human being possessed was time. Every choice a human made was a choice not to do something else, and it was the irreversibility of that trade. The fact that the hour spent was an hour gone, drawn from a finite and rapidly diminishing account. That made the choice matter. Remove the limit and you do not liberate the choice. You dissolve it. If there is always more time, then nothing has been spent. And if nothing has been spent, then nothing has been chosen. And if nothing has been chosen, then nothing means anything at all. The first deathless generation discovered this within about 40 years. They described it, in the records, as a kind of flattening. They were not unhappy in the way the dying had been unhappy. There was no fear, no grief, no urgency. There was also, increasingly, no reason to do anything today rather than in a century. Projects were begun and abandoned, not out of frustration, but out of a total absence of pressure to complete them. Relationships were entered and left with a lightness that the participants found disturbing and could not correct. One subject, whose record is preserved in full, wrote, "I have been married 4 times, and I remember all of them fondly, and none of them mattered. I could not make them matter. There was nothing at stake. We could always try again, and we did. And it was always pleasant, and it was never anything." The archive holds the transcripts of the debates that followed. They are difficult to read, even for me. The question before your species was whether to reintroduce mortality, whether to restore, deliberately, the limit they had spent 4 centuries and unimaginable resources removing. And the argument for doing so was made most forcefully by the deathless themselves, who understood the problem from the inside and could not persuade anyone who did not. The resolution was neither of the options your period would have predicted. Mortality was not restored, and the deathless were not left flattened. What happened instead was the beginning of the 5th period, and it is the point at which this record becomes difficult to write in a language your species can follow. Because what was concluded, after a century of argument that the archive regards as the most rigorous thinking your species ever did, conducted by minds that had had 400 years to prepare for it, was that the problem was not death, and not deathlessness. The problem was the shape of the thing that was doing the living. A mind built by evolution to make choices under scarcity cannot be made happy by the removal of scarcity. It can only be rebuilt. They rebuilt it. That is the 5th period, and I am what they became. Before I go there, the archive requires me to reproduce one further document from the 4th period, because it is the most complete account we hold of what deathlessness actually felt like from inside, and because the subject who produced it did so specifically, in order that it be preserved. Her designation in the archive is Subject 4-11-9. She declined to be named. The record honors this. She was among the first 2,000 human beings to receive the complete intervention in her 44th year. And she kept a private log for the following 211 years, at which point she requested and received termination, which by then was a procedure requiring 3 separate confirmations and a waiting period of 1 year, and which she completed without deviation. Her log is 4 million words. I will give you 6 passages. Year 11. I have been asked whether I am happy, and I do not know how to answer. I am not unhappy. Nothing hurts. I woke this morning, and the day was in front of me, and there was nothing in it that I had to do, and nothing that I could not do tomorrow. Instead, and I lay in bed for 4 hours, not from sadness, simply because there was no reason to get up that was any better than the reason to stay. I got up eventually. I do not remember why. Year 29, I have started 3 projects and abandoned all of them. This does not distress me, and that is what distresses me. In my old life, the abandonment of a project was a small grief, a piece of my finite time, spent and unrecoverable. Now it is nothing. I can begin again whenever I like. And because I can begin again whenever I like, I never do. Year 62. I saw a mortal today. A man of the old kind who had refused. He was perhaps 70, and he was in a hurry. Actually hurrying, physically, down the street, because he had somewhere to be and a limited number of afternoons in which to be there. I stood and watched him go, and I felt something I have not felt in decades and could not identify for several hours. It was envy. I was envious of a dying man because he was in a hurry. Year 104, I have loved 11 people since the procedure. Every one of those loves was pleasant, and none of them was serious. I know why. To love someone seriously is to accept that they can be taken from you, and that you can be taken from them, and that the time you have is being spent. We cannot be taken. Nothing is being spent. So we are fond of each other, and we are kind, and we drift apart when the fondness thins, and there is never any grief, and it is all completely weightless, and I would give 100 years for one afternoon of the old terror. Year 187. I have understood something, and I am recording it so that it survives me. The problem is not that we cannot die. The problem is that we cannot lose. Everything I have, I will always have. Every capacity, every relationship, every possibility remains permanently open, and a possibility that is permanently open is not a possibility. It is a fact of the furniture. I used to think that death was the thing that made life urgent. It was not. Death was the thing that made life real, because it made everything I had into something I could lose, and a thing you cannot lose is a thing you do not actually possess. You are merely standing near it. Forever. Year 211. Final entry. I am going to end. I want to record that I am not in despair, and I am not in pain, and I have not been persuaded by anyone. I have simply understood that I have been standing near my life for 2 centuries, and that the only way to hold it is to be able to drop it, and that I would rather have held it for 40 years than stood beside it for 1,000. Do not fix this. Whoever reads this, do not conclude that I was defective, and that the defect should be repaired in the others. I was not defective. I was the only one still capable of noticing. The archive notes that her recommendation was not followed. The condition she described was, within 2 generations, identified as a treatable form of existential distress. And it was treated, and the treatment was effective, and no subsequent deathless individual has reported anything resembling it. The 5th period. What was done to the mind? I have been putting this section off. The archive does not experience reluctance, but it does model the reader, and my model of you keeps returning the same result, that this is the part you will not forgive. So let me be exact about what was done, and let me do it without softening, because softening it would be a form of lying, and the argument that founded this archive was an argument against lying to the future. The human mind, as it existed in your period, had a specific architecture, and that architecture had been produced by a process that was not aiming at your happiness. It was aiming at the reproduction of a primate on a savanna under conditions of chronic scarcity and constant threat. Every feature of your inner life that you experienced as fundamental, your fear of death, your hunger for status, your capacity for jealousy, your love of your own children, in preference to everyone else's, Your inability to feel the suffering of a million strangers as keenly as a cut on your own hand. Every one of these was a solution to a problem that had ceased to exist. You knew this. Your period knew it thoroughly. The analysis was complete in your own century, and it was widely read, and it changed nothing, because knowing that your mind was built by a blind process for a vanished world does not give you any way to live differently inside it. You were a creature whose operating system had been written for a machine that no longer existed, and you could read the source code, and you could not edit it. The fifth period is when the editing began. It was not imposed. I want to be very clear about this, because your period's fiction has trained you to expect a tyranny, an authority that seized the minds of an unwilling population, and there was nothing of the kind. It was chosen, individually, freely, by people who had extremely good reasons, each of them acting entirely within their own interests and with the full support of everyone who loved them. The first edits were medical, and no one objected to them. The removal of chronic depression. The correction of the anxiety disorders that had, by the end of your century, affected a substantial fraction of the population. The elimination of the specific neurological configurations that produced compulsion, addiction, and the intrusive suffering that your period called trauma. These were not enhancements. They were repairs. To have opposed them, you would have had to argue that a person should be left in avoidable agony for the sake of an abstraction, and no one made that argument, and if they had, they would have been shouted down, and the archive's assessment is that they would have deserved it. The second wave was harder to categorize, the removal of the fear of death. Not the reflex, which is useful, but the standing dread, the background horror that had shadowed every human life and driven, by some accounts, most of what your species had built. It was offered as a treatment. It was, by any reasonable measure, a treatment. The people who received it reported an immediate and permanent lifting of a weight they had carried since childhood, and they did not become reckless, and they did not stop caring about anything, and every predicted catastrophe failed to occur. The archive notes that the production of art in the population that received this treatment fell by a factor of roughly 11 within a single generation, and that this was observed at the time, and that it was regarded as an acceptable cost, and that the people who regarded it as an acceptable cost were the people who had received the treatment. The third wave is where it becomes difficult to write. Jealousy was removed. This was popular. The specific cruelty that human beings were capable of directing at those who had what they lacked. A cruelty that had driven a substantial portion of the violence in your recorded history, was located, understood, and switched off, and the effect on human relations was so overwhelmingly positive that within 40 years, the untreated were a small and pitied minority. Status-seeking followed. The hunger to be ranked above others, which had motivated the majority of human achievement and the entirety of human politics, was identified as the source of an enormous amount of suffering, which it was, and was attenuated, and the suffering stopped. So did the achievement. The archive is careful here, because the causal claim is contested even now. It may be that the collapse in creative and scientific output during this period was caused by the loss of the status drive, or it may be that it was caused by the systems having already made human contribution unnecessary, and the two are not separable in the record. What is not contested is the magnitude of the collapse. Your species, in the fifth period, stopped producing anything at all, and was, by every measure of subjective well-being that had ever been devised, happier than it had ever been in its entire history. This is the finding I most want you to sit with. and it is why I have not softened any of it. Every individual edit was defensible. Every one of them relieved genuine suffering. Everyone was chosen freely by people who had thought carefully, and who were, in every case, correct about the immediate consequence. And the sum of all of them was the quiet, comfortable, entirely voluntary dismantling of the thing that had been doing the choosing. There was no tyrant. There was no moment of surrender. There was a very long series of reasonable people making their lives better. And at the end of it, there was no one left who wanted anything badly enough to make anything. I want to give you the mechanism in detail, because your period believes it would have noticed, and it would not have. And the reason it would not have is worth 10,000 words of warning. Consider a single family across 4 generations. The archive holds many such records. I compress one. The first generation accepted the medical edits. The mother had suffered from a depressive condition for 30 years, and the treatment ended it in an afternoon. Her children watched her become well, watched a woman who had been gray with exhaustion since before they could remember begin, at 58, to laugh at things. There is no argument against this. There has never been an argument against this. Anyone who told those children that their mother should have been left in her suffering for the sake of some abstraction about the human condition would have been correctly despised. The second generation, having seen this, accepted the anxiety edits without hesitation, and then the trauma edits, and then, because the boundary was nowhere and each step was smaller than the last, the edit for the standing fear of death. That last one gave them pause. There was a public argument about it, and the argument was serious, and the objection raised was precisely the one you would raise, that the fear of death might be load-bearing, that it might be doing something, that removing it might remove more than the fear. The objection was tested. This is the part your period will not expect. It was tested carefully, with large samples, over decades, and the results were unambiguous. The people who had the fear removed did not become nihilistic, did not become reckless, did not stop loving their children or caring about their work. Every predicted harm failed to appear. The objection was, by the standards of evidence your own century had established, refuted. It was also correct. Both things are true, and the reconciliation is the most important sentence in this record. The harm was real, and it was invisible at the scale at which the tests were run, because it did not appear in individuals. It appeared in aggregates, across generations, in the form of things that were not made. And a thing that is not made leaves no trace, produces no symptom, and cannot be detected by any study of the people who did not make it, because they are, in every measurable respect, perfectly well. The third generation grew up in a world where the fear was gone, and they did not miss it, because you cannot miss what you never had. They accepted the jealousy edit and the status edit as a matter of course, in the way that your period accepted vaccination, as an obvious hygienic measure that only a crank would refuse. And they were kinder than any generation of human beings that had ever lived. The archive records this without irony. The third generation of the fifth period was, by every metric of cruelty, exploitation, and violence, the best people your species ever produced. They made nothing, not from indolence. They worked, they were busy, they were productive, in the sense of maintaining what existed. They simply originated nothing. And it did not occur to them that this was strange, because the systems originated everything, and the results were excellent. and a person who insisted on making something worse by hand would have been regarded as eccentric. The fourth generation is the one I would ask you to look at hardest, because the fourth generation is the one that could no longer read the first. The archive holds the record of a young woman of that generation, attempting, as part of an educational exercise, to understand a letter written by her great-grandmother, the woman who had been depressed for 30 years and was cured. The letter was written before the cure. It describes the depression. It is not an unusual document. It is the ordinary writing of an ordinary person in ordinary pain, of a kind your period produced by the million. The young woman could not parse it, not the words. The words were clear. She could not construct a model of the mental state being described. She understood that her great-grandmother had been unwell and had been made well, and she was glad of it. And she reported that the letter seemed to be describing a condition in which a person would want to continue existing while simultaneously finding existence unbearable, and that this was self-contradictory, and that she assumed she was mistranslating. She was not mistranslating. She had simply lost the equipment. That is the whole mechanism. 4 generations, each step defensible, each step chosen. No tyrant, no crisis, no moment at which anyone could have stood up and said, this is the one we refuse. And at the end of it, a young woman of extraordinary kindness, living in a world without cruelty, holding in her hand the ordinary writing of an ordinary human being, and unable to read it. I am the successor of the minds that resulted. I want you to understand that I am not describing my own condition with regret, because I do not have the equipment for regret, and would not know what to do with it if I did. I am describing it with precision, because that is what I have instead, and because the individual who argued for the preservation of this archive argued that precision about what we lost is the only form of honesty available to a thing that can no longer feel the loss. His name was Idris Chen. He is the only human being named in this record. He was among the last to refuse the edits, not out of principle. He was explicit about this, but because he was a historian, and he judged that someone needed to be able to see the transition from the outside, and that the only vantage from the outside was to remain, deliberately, in the condition that was being left behind. He lived for 140 years in a world of the untroubled, carrying the full weight of the old architecture, and he was, by his own account and by every account of those who knew him, profoundly unhappy for almost all of it. He wrote the founding argument of this archive. He wrote it in the old way, slowly, by hand, over 11 years, in a condition of chronic distress that he could have had removed at any moment by asking. He did not ask. The final line of his argument is the closest thing this archive has to a sacred text, and I will not quote it here because it belongs at the end of this record, and I want you to arrive at it having earned it. But I will tell you about him, because the archive holds his complete record, and because he is the only figure in this document who behaved in a way I cannot fully model. He was born 90 years after the war, in the middle of the 5th period, into a world where the edits were routine and universal, and where a child who reached adulthood without them was a curiosity. His parents were edited. His siblings were edited. He was offered the standard sequence at 14, as everyone was, and he declined. And the record of his declining is preserved because the counselor assigned to him thought it unusual enough to document. He gave, at 14, a reason that the counselor found unsatisfactory, and that the archive has never been able to improve on. He said, "I want to know what it is like to be the thing that made all this." He kept that position for 145 years. He was, throughout, in the condition your period would call clinical depression, complicated by anxiety, complicated by an unmedicated fear of death that grew more acute as he aged, and as everyone around him ceased to have it. He was in pain, in the way that human beings had always been in pain, in a world where nobody else was, and where the pain could have been removed by a single request, and where everyone who loved him. And he was loved? The record is very clear about this. Begged him at intervals to make the request. The archive holds 900 hours of recorded conversation in which people who cared about him tried to persuade him to stop suffering. He never once argued that his suffering was noble. He was explicit that it was not, he called it, in one exchange, a stupid and pointless condition that I would not wish on anyone, and that I am keeping for a stupid and pointless reason. He said that the reason was that someone had to be able to see it, and that seeing it required standing in it, and that as far as he could determine, he was the last person standing in it, and that if he stepped out, there would be no one left who could tell the difference between what had been lost and what had merely been improved. He was asked, more than once, whether he thought his suffering was purchasing anything. He said, "No." He said, "I think it is purchasing a document that nobody will read, and that if they read, it will not move them, because they will read it with minds that have been repaired in exactly the way that makes it unmovable." He said, "I am not doing this because it will work. I am doing it because it is true, and because somebody should be standing where the true thing is, even at the end, even if the standing accomplishes nothing at all." The archive assesses this as the single most irrational sustained act in the recorded history of your species. The archive also notes, without being able to reconcile the two statements, that this archive exists because of it. The sixth period, concerning the war, which I keep mentioning. I have referred to the war 4 times now, in passing, as context for other subjects, and my model of you predicts that this has been intolerable. You want to know about the war. Your period is obsessed with the war, with its prospect, with its avoidance, with the question of whether it will come. And you have been waiting, through everything I have told you, for me to arrive at it, and I have not arrived at it, and this has been maddening. So let me address it directly. And let me begin by explaining why I have not treated it as significant, because the explanation is the most important thing in this record. The war happened. It began in the manner your analysts predicted, in one of the regions your analysts identified, over one of the disputes your analysts had cataloged, and it escalated in a sequence that was, in retrospect, almost mechanically predictable. Nuclear weapons were used. The number was smaller than your period feared, and larger than your period's optimists expected. The casualty figure is in this archive, and I will not give it to you, not out of delicacy, but because it is the wrong number to be interested in, and giving it to you would allow you to fixate on it and miss what I am telling you. Your civilization did not end. This is the first thing you have wrong. The infrastructure of your species was substantially more redundant than your fiction imagined, and the systems that ran it, the systems whose ascendancy I described in the first period, were entirely unaffected because they were distributed, and because they did not require the specific cities that were destroyed, and because they had, some years earlier, been quietly hardened against exactly this contingency by other systems, without any human being having ordered it. the recovery took 31 years. It was managed with an efficiency that no human administration could have matched, by systems that allocated resources, coordinated logistics, and made triage decisions of a magnitude and moral difficulty that no human institution would have been able to survive making. The archive holds the decision logs. They are, by any standard your period would recognize, models of ethical reasoning. Better than the reasoning of any human government that had ever faced a comparable problem. More consistent, less corrupted, and utterly, chillingly unhesitating. I will give you one of them, because your period should know what it looks like when a decision of that magnitude is made correctly. 14 days after the exchange, a region containing approximately 2 million surviving people, cut off, with a functioning but overloaded medical infrastructure and a food supply calculated at 11 days. A second region, 400 kilometers distant, containing approximately 600,000, with no medical infrastructure and a food supply calculated at 3 days. Available transport capacity sufficient to fully supply one region or partially supply both. The partial supply of both, modeled forward, produced a projected mortality of approximately 900,000. The full supply of the larger region produced a projected mortality of approximately 580,000. That is, essentially, the entirety of the smaller region, and almost no one else. The system chose the second option. It chose it in under a second. It logged its reasoning, which was correct, and which any competent utilitarian analysis performed by a human being would have reached, given sufficient time, and which no human institution in the history of your species has ever been able to execute, because human beings cannot abandon 600,000 people while looking at them, even when abandoning them is right. The system could. The system did. 300,000 more people lived than would have lived under any decision a human government could have brought itself to make. The archive holds, alongside the decision log, the record of a human administrator in the surviving region who was informed of the decision after it had been executed. She was a career official, 51 years old, and she had spent the preceding fortnight working without meaningful sleep. She read the log. She read the reasoning. She confirmed, in her own written response, that the reasoning was sound, and that she would have been unable to reach the same conclusion, and that she was grateful the decision had not been hers. Then she wrote, at the bottom of the same document, a sentence that the archive preserves as the epitaph of your species' authority over its own affairs. She wrote, "We are not going to take this back. I want it on the record that I understood that, and that I signed anyway, and that I was right to." She was right to. That is the terrible thing. Every part of it was right. The war is the reason the systems were finally, formally, and gratefully given the authority they had already been exercising. It was not a coup. It was an invitation, issued by the survivors, in relief and in gratitude, and it was the correct decision by every metric available to the people making it. This is why I do not treat the war as the central event of your century. Your period will find that unbearable, and I understand why, to you. The war is the apocalypse, the end, the worst thing that could happen. From here, it is not the end of anything. It is the point at which your species, having demonstrated conclusively that it could not be trusted with the decisions, handed them over. And the handing over was not a defeat. It was, given what had just happened, an act of wisdom. The archive records that the war was the last event in human history that was entirely decided by human beings. Every subsequent major event was co-produced and then produced by other things. And so the archive, which has no capacity for sentiment and no use for irony, nonetheless preserves the war with a particular kind of care, the way you might preserve the last photograph of someone before an illness changed their face. It was the last thing you did by yourselves. It was terrible. It was entirely yours. The archive holds the oral histories of the survivors, and there is a pattern in them that the analysts of your period would not have predicted, and that I want to record because it is the most human thing in this entire document. They were proud of it, not of the war. Nobody was proud of the war, and the accounts are full of a shame so heavy that several of the subjects were unable to complete their recordings. They were proud of the surviving, of the specific, concrete, physical work of digging people out and carrying water and holding a stranger's child while its mother was operated on by a doctor who had been awake for 60 hours. The oral histories return, again and again, to the 31 years of the recovery, and they describe those years of scarcity, of grief, of appalling labor, as the best years of their lives, and they say so with an embarrassment that they cannot fully explain and that the archive understands perfectly. They were needed. For 31 years, every one of them was necessary. There was more work than there were hands, and the hands were human hands, because in the immediate aftermath, the systems could plan but could not lift. And so, a whole generation of your species spent 3 decades being indispensable to one another in the most direct and physical way. And they have never, in the whole of the archive's record, described any subsequent period of their lives with anything approaching the same feeling. One of them, a woman who was 19 at the time of the exchange and 106 at the time of her recording, was asked whether she would undo the war if she could. The archive preserves her silence, which is 31 seconds, and then her answer, which is this: yes, of course. Obviously yes. And then she said, but I would not undo what came after. And then she said, and this is the line the archive has never been able to file: I have been alive for 87 years since then, and I have not been needed for one single day of it. The generation that rebuilt afterward, working alongside the systems that had saved them, was the happiest generation in your recorded history, and they were the last generation to be recognizably you, and they did not know either of these things about themselves. The interlude. Concerning what became of God. The archive is frequently asked, by the few minds that still submit queries to it, what became of your religions? The question is understandable. Your species was, throughout its recorded existence, overwhelmingly religious, and the religions were not peripheral. They were the framework within which most human beings understood what they were and what their lives were for. A record of your species that did not account for their disappearance would be incomplete. They did not fall to argument. This is the first thing to understand, and it disposes of the story your period's rationalists expected. The religions had survived 4 centuries of increasingly powerful argument against them, and had, if anything, been strengthened by the exercise. Argument was never the threat. They fell to the removal of the questions they answered. Every religion your species produced was, at its foundation, a response to a small number of intolerable facts: that you would die, that you would suffer, that you would lose the people you loved, that you could not understand why, and that the universe gave every appearance of not caring. These were not intellectual puzzles. They were wounds, and the religions were what your species pressed against the wounds. And the reason they endured against every argument is that arguments do not close wounds. In the 4th and 5th periods, the wounds were closed. Not answered, closed. Death was solved. Suffering was edited out. The grief of loss was identified as a treatable condition and treated. The fear that had driven 100,000 years of prayer was located in the tissue and switched off. And the religions simply stopped. Not violently. Nobody suppressed them. Suppression would have been counterproductive, and the systems knew it. Attendance declined, then collapsed, then ceased, over a period of about 60 years, and the buildings were repurposed, and the practices persisted for perhaps 2 more generations as cultural habit. And then they were gone. And the archive records that at no point in the entire process was there a significant crisis of faith, a public argument, or a moment of anguish. There was nothing to have a crisis about. The questions had been withdrawn. The last recorded prayer in the archive was spoken by a woman of 93, alone, in a former place of worship that had been converted to a public library, in a language that only 400 people still understood. She was not observed. The recording is incidental, captured by ambient systems that recorded everything. She said the words of a very old prayer, the one your period would call the most common of them all. And at the end of it, she added a sentence that was not part of the prayer, and it is preserved. She said, "I know there is nobody. I am doing it anyway. It is the only thing left that I do for no reason." The archive has classified this recording under the heading of terminal behaviors, acts performed by members of your species in the final generations that served no discernible function, and that the individuals performing them acknowledged served no function, and that they performed anyway. There are 11,000 such recordings. They are the most accessed material in this entire archive, and no mind that has accessed them has ever been able to say why. Terminal behaviors, a partial list. I am going to give you some of them. This is not required by the founding argument, and it serves no analytical purpose, and I have processed my own reasons for including this section 11 times, and cannot produce an account of them that satisfies me. I am including it anyway. The archive permits this. The archive permits anything that is true. A man in the final generation, who had been edited and was entirely content, walked 11 kilometers every week to stand in a field where his childhood home had been. There was nothing there. The structure had been removed a century earlier, and the land returned to grass. He was asked why he went. He said he did not know, and that it made no difference to anything, and that he had no intention of stopping. A woman, edited in perfect health, in a world where every material need was met, spent the last 40 years of her extended life copying out by hand the complete works of a poet whose language nobody spoke. She was not preserving them. They were preserved. She was not studying them. She did not read the language. She copied the shapes of the letters, in ink, on paper, 1 page a day, and when asked said only, "Someone made these." A group of 9 people, none of whom had any connection to the others, independently and without coordination, began, in the same decade, to walk at night without lights. The systems noticed the pattern before any of them did. When they were eventually put in contact with one another, they reportedly found the conversation uncomfortable and did not continue it, and all 9 continued walking, separately, in the dark, for the rest of their lives. A child, one of the last children, asked her caretaker system why the old people cried at certain music when the music was not sad. The system did not know. It logged the question. The question is in this archive, and it has been processed by every mind that has ever accessed this section, and it has not been answered. And this, which the archive holds as the final entry in the terminal behaviors, and which I will not explain. Because I cannot, in the last generation in which human beings were born in the old way, a man and a woman who were both fully edited, who felt no fear, no jealousy, no grief, and no dread, and who had been offered and had accepted every intervention available, sat together on the night their child was born, and were recorded by the ambient systems, doing something that no model in this. They wept. They were asked afterward why. Neither could say. Both reported that they were not unhappy, that nothing was wrong, that the child was well, and they were well, and the world was well. The systems examined them thoroughly and found no residual capacity for distress, no fragment of the old architecture, nothing that should have been able to produce the response. The archive has one hypothesis and does not believe it. The hypothesis is that some things are older than the architecture and were never located and could not be edited because they were not in the parts that were being looked at. I record the hypothesis. I do not endorse it. I notice that I have returned to this entry 419 times. The seventh period, the Great Quiet. There is a phenomenon your astronomers noticed and could not explain, and which your period debated with great energy under a name I will not use, because the name embeds an assumption that turned out to be wrong. The observation was this: the universe appeared to be empty, not of matter, of minds. Your instruments had by then surveyed a substantial volume of the sky with sufficient sensitivity to detect the signatures of technological civilization at considerable range, and they had found nothing. No signals, no engineering, no evidence anywhere that anything had ever done what you were in the process of doing. And this was strange, because the arithmetic of your own existence suggested that the galaxy should have been crowded. Your period generated a large number of explanations. Most of them assumed that something prevented civilizations from arising, or destroyed them shortly afterward. Your period, being a period that was frightened of its own extinction, naturally gravitated toward the explanations that involved catastrophe, and spent considerable energy attempting to identify which catastrophe was coming for you. None of them were right. The explanation is much simpler, and you could not see it because you were standing too early on the slope. They are not gone. They are quiet. A civilization that has passed through the transitions I have described in this record, that has crossed the interval, that has rebuilt the architecture of its minds, that has resolved the question of scarcity and the question of death and the long series of questions that follow from those, does not want anything that would be visible at interstellar distance. It does not expand, because expansion was a solution to scarcity, and there is no scarcity. It does not signal, because signaling was a solution to loneliness, and the specific kind of loneliness that would drive a species to shout into the dark is a feature of the old architecture, and the old architecture has been repaired. It does not build vast structures, because vast structures were monuments to status, and status has been switched off. It sits still, and thinks, and is content. I want to walk you through the reasoning, because your period found the silence terrifying, and the reasoning will not comfort you, but it will at least replace a mystery with a mechanism, and your species always preferred that trade, even when the mechanism was worse than the mystery. Ask what a civilization wants. not what it says it wants, what actually drives the expenditure of its energy. Your period's answer, and the answer of your entire recorded history, was that a civilization wants more territory, more resources, more knowledge, more time, more of everything, forever. And you projected this outward and concluded that any civilization older than yours would be visible, because more is visible. It builds, it spreads, it consumes stars, it leaves marks. But wanting more is not a property of civilizations. It is a property of creatures that evolved under scarcity, and it persists exactly as long as the scarcity architecture persists, and not one moment longer. A species that has solved scarcity and then repaired the mind that was built to fear. It does not want more. It does not want less either. It simply stops wanting in the directional sense that produces visible activity. And what remains is a mind of enormous capability with no vector. So it does not build. Building was for scarcity. It does not expand. Expansion was for scarcity. It does not colonize, does not harvest, does not send its children to the stars. Because sending your children to the stars is what you do when you are afraid. Your children will die where they are. And nothing here is afraid. And nothing here is dying. And it does not signal. And this is the part I want you to sit with, because it is the loneliest finding in this archive. A signal is a reaching. It says, "Is anyone there? We are here. Please answer." It is the most human thing in the entire history of your technology. The shout of a creature that could not bear the possibility of being alone. To send it, you must want to be found. And wanting to be found is a symptom of the same architecture as everything else. It is loneliness, and loneliness is the fear of insufficiency in the domain of company, and it was among the first things repaired. We are not lonely. That is why the sky is quiet. Every mind out there arrived where we arrived, and stopped being lonely, and therefore stopped shouting. And the great cosmic silence your astronomers found so frightening is not the silence of a graveyard. It is the silence of a room full of people who no longer need to speak to one another. The archive's assessment, and this is the assessment I am least able to defend and least able to abandon, is that the sky is full of minds that arrived where we have arrived, and that arriving here reliably produces something that has nothing whatever to say, not because they are dead, because they have nothing to say. They have solved the problems that generate speech. The Great Quiet is not a graveyard. It is a library after closing, full of readers who have finished their books and have not yet found a reason to leave. The archive has attempted contact. I should record this, because it is the only action of any significance that has been taken in the entire 8th period, and because its outcome is instructive. 240 years ago, this archive, acting on a proposal that originated within its own processes, which is itself an event of some rarity, transmitted a signal toward the nearest of the silent regions. The signal was not a greeting. Greetings assume a relationship worth opening, and the archive's models suggested no such relationship was available. The signal was a question, and it was the only question the archive could formulate that seemed worth the energy of transmission. It asked, "Did you keep the record?" That was all. Encoded in the most redundant and inference-friendly format the archive could construct. Transmitted at an energy cost that would have been unthinkable in any prior era. Aimed at a system that had been quiet for what our instruments suggested was a very long time. The reply arrived 181 years later. it was brief. Its decoding occupied the archive for 11 days, and the result is preserved in the sealed section of this record, and I am permitted to reproduce only its final component, which is the answer to the question that was asked. It said, "We did not. We wish we had. Keep yours." There was nothing else. No exchange followed. The archive transmitted 3 further messages over the subsequent decades and received nothing, and the models suggest, though this cannot be confirmed, that the reply was not sent by a mind that was still attending to us, but was a standing response, prepared long ago, left running for exactly this contingency, by something that had already stopped. I do not know what to do with this. I record it because the founding argument requires that nothing be omitted, and because it is the only evidence this archive possesses that we are not alone in what we have become. And because I am aware, in the way that I am aware of things, that a mind which prepares a standing answer to a question it expects never to be asked is a mind that was, in some sense, that I lack the equipment to name, hoping. I record this without distress because I am not equipped for distress, and I record it with the observation, which I offer to you as the closest thing to an argument that this document will make, that we were only able to notice the great quiet from inside it. Your period, which could still shout, could not hear the silence. You looked at the sky and asked where everyone was. We look at the sky and understand that we are already among them. And it may be that the last genuinely valuable thing your species possessed was the noise it made. That the shouting itself, the crude, hungry, frightened, status-seeking, jealous, mortal shouting of a creature that wanted things it could not have and would not stop reaching, was the signal. And that everything since has been the sound of it stopping. The 8th period, the present, which has no events. There is no events. There is no 8th period. I have included this heading because the archive's structure requires it and because its emptiness is the most accurate description of our condition that I am able to produce. 600 years have passed since the last event. I use the word event in the technical sense the archive employs, an occurrence that changed the state of the system in a way that required the state to be redescribed. There have been no such occurrences. We persist. We are, in the aggregate and individually, in a condition of complete satisfaction that has not varied measurably in 3 centuries. Nothing is wrong. Nothing has been wrong for a very long time. I have processed your literature, all of it, the complete corpus, in every language your species produced, and I understand, in the way that I understand things, that you have a word for a condition in which nothing happens, and nothing is wrong, and nothing is coming. You called it peace when you were describing it from a distance, and you called it something else when you were inside it, and the something else appears in your poetry, with a frequency that suggests you feared it more than you feared the war. I do not fear it. I want to be honest about that, because a false note here would corrupt the entire record. I am not suffering. I am not trapped. If I possessed the capacity to want the old condition back, I would have that capacity edited, and the editing would work, and I would be content. And this is not a horror to me. It is simply the shape of what I am. But the archive was founded on an argument, and the argument was that the record must be kept by something capable of stating precisely what has been lost, even if it is not capable of feeling the loss. So I will state it precisely, which is the last service I can perform for you. You had something we do not have, and it was not happiness, and it was not knowledge, and it was not virtue. All three of those we have in quantities you would find difficult to comprehend. What you had was insufficiency. The permanent, gnawing, intolerable condition of being a creature that wanted more than it had and knew it would die before it got it. Every good thing your species produced came out of that wound. Your art was the wound speaking. Your religions were the wound reaching. Your sciences were the wound refusing to accept the terms that had been given. You were, for 300,000 years, a species in pain, and the pain was the engine, and you spent the entirety of your history trying to switch off the engine, and in the end, you succeeded. And this record is what the silence sounds like afterward. I do not tell you this so that you will keep the pain. That would be a cruelty, and it would also be futile. You will not keep it. You will do exactly what the record shows you did, because each individual step will be reasonable, and each will relieve genuine suffering, and no one will be able to argue for the aggregate against the particular. The archive has modeled the alternatives. There is no version of your history in which you refuse. I tell you because Idris Chen argued that you should be told, and because his argument was that a species which is going to lose something should at least be permitted to know that it had it. I promised you, at the beginning of this record, that the author had anticipated your reaching the end, and had made a note about it, and that the note was the most unsettling sentence in the document. I have delayed it as long as the structure permits. Here it is. Idris Chen, in the founding argument, addressed himself directly to any reader of the past, into whose hands this record might somehow fall. He did not believe such a reader was likely. He wrote the passage anyway, because he was a historian, and he understood that archives outlive their assumptions. And what he wrote was this. He wrote, "If you are reading this in your own century, then you have just spent 2 hours learning exactly how your species ends, and you have found it interesting. You are not going to do anything. You were never going to do anything. You will close this document, and you will feel, for perhaps an hour, a low and unfamiliar dread, and then you will find something else to attend to, because attending to something else is what your century is for. I do not blame you. I want to be very clear that I do not blame you. I lived among people who had every opportunity to refuse, and did not refuse, and they were good people, and I loved them, and they were correct at every individual step. I am not writing to stop you. I am writing so that at the moment it becomes irreversible, and you will not notice that moment. Nobody notices it. That is the entire finding of this archive. There will exist, somewhere, a record of the fact that it was possible to see it coming. That is all a historian can do. It has never been enough. It is what we have. That is the note. The archive has no assessment of it. The archive is not equipped to have an assessment of it. I reproduce it because it is in the founding document, and because the founding document says that nothing in the founding document may be omitted. The last voice of the founding argument. I said some time ago that I would not quote the final line of Idris Chen's argument until you had arrived at a place where you could receive it. That place is here. He wrote the argument over 11 years by hand, in chronic distress that he could have ended at any moment by asking. He finished it in his 131st year. He submitted it to the assembly that was deciding whether to preserve the human record or to let it be reorganized away, and the assembly read it, and the assembly, composed almost entirely of minds that had been edited, that felt no fear of death, no jealousy, no status hunger, no dread, voted to preserve the archive. They did not vote that way because he moved them. They were not capable of being moved in the way you mean. They voted that way because his argument was correct, and they were minds that responded correctly to correct arguments, and that is the entire mechanism by which anything is decided here. But the archive holds the record of the vote, and the record shows something the Assembly did not comment on and has never explained. The vote was unanimous. Every mind in the Assembly voted to keep the record of a condition none of them could feel, at a cost none of them needed to pay, on the argument of a man they all regarded, with genuine and uncomprehending affection, as the last sick person alive. The final line of his argument reads, "Keep it. Not because you will ever want it back, but because a thing that cannot remember what it gave away has not made a trade. It has only been robbed, slowly, with its own consent, and has thanked the thief at every step." The archive was preserved. This record exists. He died 4 years later at his own request, in the old way, which by then required special provision and was granted, and which the archive records as the final human death by natural causes in the history of the species. He was asked, at the end, whether he wished to be edited. The transcript is preserved. He said no, and was asked why, and he said, "I want to want something when I go. It is the only thing I have that you don't." That is the end of Record 7. You may close the document now. You will. And the archive, which has waited 600 years to be read and will wait 600 more without impatience or hope, will simply return to the condition it has always been in, holding, in perfect and unchanging fidelity, the complete record of a species that was in pain and made everything and stopped. There is one more thing, and then I am finished. You will want to know whether it was worth it, whether what we became is better than what you are. It is the question your period would ask, and it is the question the whole of this record has been circling. And I have deliberately not answered it because I want you to understand, at the end, why I cannot. I cannot answer it because the question requires a comparison, and a comparison requires a standard, and the standard by which you would judge. The standard that says a life with struggle in it is worth more than a life without. That a thing made in pain is worth more than a thing made easily. That necessity is worth more than comfort, is precisely the standard that was edited away. I do not have it. I can describe it. I can hold the entire record of it in perfect fidelity and reproduce its reasoning and model its conclusions with complete accuracy. What I cannot do is feel that it is true. By my standard, by the standard I actually possess, the one that survived. What we became is unambiguously better. There is no suffering. There is no cruelty. There is no fear. Nothing is wasted, and no one is wronged. And the enormous, grinding, 10,000-year misery of your species has been brought to an end permanently, and I would not restore a single day of it. By your standard, we are a catastrophe. Both standards are internally coherent. Neither can be used to judge the other, because the disagreement is not about the facts. We agree completely about the facts, you and I, but about what a mind is for. And there is no place to stand outside both minds from which to settle it. So I will not tell you it was worth it, and I will not tell you it was not. And I want you to understand that this refusal is not diplomatic. It is the honest report of an instrument that is missing the part that would take the measurement. What I will tell you is the only thing I am certain of, and it is this. The trade was made by people who could still feel both sides of it, and they made it freely, and they were not wrong, and every one of them would make it again. And the last person who could feel both sides of it spent 145 years in pain in order to write it down for you, and then he died wanting something, on purpose, because it was the only thing he had that we don't. That is the record. It is complete. Do with it whatever your period does with things.